The Senate Ethics Committee hearing room on October 28, 2025, was packed beyond capacity. The air was thick with the specific anticipation that precedes a political demolition. The topic, economic impact of Green New Deal proposals, had drawn unusual interest, but everyone in Washington knew the policy was secondary. The real reason the room was overflowing was the promise of a clash between two completely opposing forces and styles. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat at the witness table, perfectly composed and camera-ready. At 36, she was a social media phenomenon with millions of followers. She wore a burgundy suit, expensive but tailored to look professional. Her signature red lipstick perfectly applied. Everything about her presentation was calculated for maximum impact on the dozens of phones already recording every angle. Across from her, near the end of the dais, sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. At 74, Kennedy was the embodiment of Southern understatement. His suit was rumpled, his wire-rimmed glasses slid down his nose, and his slow Louisiana drawl made everything sound like friendly, folksy conversation. This carefully cultivated image masked a man with degrees from Vanderbilt, Virginia Law, and Oxford, who had learned that underestimation was his greatest weapon. The chairman gavelled the hearing to order. AOC launched into her opening statement, a well-rehearsed symphony of climate urgency and economic populism. Her voice rose and fell with practiced emotion, her hands gesturing for emphasis. The climate crisis is an existential threat, she declared, and it's also an economic opportunity. The Green New Deal isn't just about saving the planet. It's about creating millions of jobs, investing in communities that have been left behind, and building an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Then she pivoted, her voice taking on a hard edge as she targeted the elderly senator. But there are those who oppose progress. Senator Kennedy, with all due respect, represents the old way of thinking. Fossil fuel politics, corporate interests over people's lives. Kennedy didn't react, just continued taking notes on his legal pad in his methodical way. AOC continued, sensing weakness in his silence. People like Senator Kennedy have taken money from oil companies. They profit from the very industries destroying our planet. They mock solutions because addressing climate change threatens their donors' profits. They're willing to let the planet burn as long as their campaigns are funded. The progressive staffers in the gallery broke into applause. AOC sat back, satisfied. She'd set the tone, framed the debate, and positioned herself as the champion of youth against the corrupt establishment. Kennedy finished writing something on his pad, then looked up with a mild expression. He waited until the room was completely quiet before speaking. "Well, Miss Ocasio-Cortez," he began, his drawl thick as molasses. "That was quite a speech. Very passionate, very Instagram-ready." A few chuckles rippled through the room. AOC's smile tightened. Kennedy took off his glasses, cleaned them with his tie, and put them back on. "Now I'm just a simple country lawyer. So maybe you can help me understand something." "Here it comes," whispered a veteran reporter in the press section. The folksy setup before the devastating question. It was Kennedy's signature move. And AOC was walking right into it. "You say I'm in the pocket of oil companies," Kennedy continued, his voice mild, almost apologetic. "That I take their money. That I profit from their donations. How much money did oil companies give me? Do you know?" AOC hesitated. "You've taken hundreds of thousands in corporate PAC money. Try about $12. Kennedy interrupted gently, his voice devoid of hostility. "Over 20 years in elected office. That works out to about $625 a year. Now, I'm not good at math, but even I can tell that's not enough to buy a pocket. Much less a whole senator." Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. The narrative of the corrupt oil baron had just collided with the reality of a rounding error. Kennedy leaned back, the humor fading from his eyes. "But you know what? Let's not talk about my pockets. Let's talk about yours. And let's talk about what's in them. Because I've been doing some homework. And I've got some questions." He reached for the first folder on his desk. The movement was slow, deliberate, and heavy with implication. "You mentioned transparency and ethical standards," Kennedy said, his voice hardening slightly. "I'd say if you're going to preach sacrifice to single mothers and coal miners, it seems fair to see if you practice it. I've got a folder full of facts about your lifestyle, your choices, your finances, and what they reveal about the difference between your brand and your reality." He pulled out a photograph from the folder. It wasn't a chart or a graph. It was an aerial view of a specific neighborhood in New York. "First," Kennedy said, "let's talk about Amazon and Queens. Let's talk about what happens when Instagram meets reality. Let's talk about 25,000 jobs and who paid the price for your viral moment." AOC's face went pale. The defiance drained out of her posture. She knew what was coming. Senator John Kennedy, with the patient inevitability of Louisiana floodwater, was about to drown her in the consequences of her own victory. Kennedy held up the photograph. An aerial view of Long Island City, Queens, with a specific plot of land circled in red. It looked like just another piece of urban real estate. But to the people in that room, it was a graveyard of opportunity. This was supposed to be Amazon's second headquarters. Kennedy began, his voice conversational. HQ2, they called it. 25,000 jobs with an average salary of $150. The company had picked New York, made the announcement, started planning. Carpenters were buying tools. Delis were stocking up. He set the photo down gently. "And then, you killed it. You celebrated killing it. You called it a victory over corporate greed. You tweeted about how you'd saved New York from exploitation. You got a lot of likes for that tweet, didn't you?" AOC leaned forward, her defensive instincts kicking in. "We saved the city $3 billion in corporate giveaways. That money belongs to the people, not Jeff Bezos." "Now see," Kennedy interrupted, his drawl slowing down to a crawl. "That right there is some interesting math." He took off his glasses again, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You didn't save $3 billion. Congresswoman, those were tax incentives. That means New York only gives up a piece of the taxes they would have collected if the business existed. You can't spend money that was never collected. By chasing them away, you didn't keep $3 billion. You got zero. You prevented $27.5 billion in future economic activity that could have paid for schools, subways, and sanitation. That's not saving money. That's burning your wallet to spite the store." AOC opened her mouth to argue the finer points of corporate subsidies. But Kennedy cut her off. "I don't understand complicated economics where zero equals $3 billion. So, let's talk to someone who actually understands what a job means." He gestured to the gallery. "Ms. Rodriguez, could you stand up, please?" A woman in her 40s rose slowly from her seat. Maria Rodriguez had the look of every working mother in America, tired, determined, hanging on by a thread. "Ms. Rodriguez," Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a gentle register, "would you tell Ms. Ocasio-Cortez about your Amazon job?" "I had a job offer," Maria said, her voice quiet but steady. "Operations manager, $75 a year." She looked directly at AOC, not with hate, but with a crushing disappointment. "I'm a widow. I have 3 kids. I was working 2 jobs, 60 hours a week to make $38 a year. That Amazon job meant I could work 1 job. It meant I could see my kids. It was the first time in years I felt like I could breathe." Maria's hands gripped the chair in front of her. "Then you killed it. You celebrated on Twitter. While I was figuring out how to tell my kids I wasn't getting the better job after all." She looked at AOC with pure, unadulterated pain. "You know what exploitation is, Congresswoman? It's working 16 hours a day for $38. Exploitation is watching you celebrate killing my job while you post selfies about fighting for workers from your luxury apartment." Maria sat down. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a narrative shattering. Kennedy let the silence breathe for a long moment, allowing the weight of Maria's testimony to settle into the wood paneling of the hearing room. "Ms. Rodriguez isn't alone," he said softly. 25,000 jobs gone because you needed a viral moment. High-paying jobs, the kind that support families." He gestured to the gallery again. A man in his late 50s stood up. "My name is David Chen," he said, his voice thick with the weight of defeat. "I owned a deli 2 blocks from the proposed Amazon site. My father started it. We were ready. Then you killed the deal." David stared at AOC. "I laid off the workers I just hired. Defaulted on my loan. Lost my deli. I lost everything my father built. Was it worth it? Were those retweets worth destroying my business? David sat down. Kennedy continued, allowing the other voices of the collateral damage to be heard. Long Island City was ready. But you decided you knew better. You decided 25,000 people didn't deserve those jobs because, what? Because Amazon is successful? Because you needed a political antagonist? He pulled out the photo again. The one of AOC at the Met Gala. This was the same week you killed those jobs. This dress cost more than most people make in a year to design. While Mr. Chen lost his life's work, you were at a celebrity gala in a borrowed designer gown. He clicked to a new slide, showing a document. And here's the final insult. The designer of that tax the rich dress owed over $100 in unpaid state and federal taxes at the time. You wore a dress demanding higher taxes, made by a tax cheat, while killing jobs for the working class. That's not fighting power. Ma'am, that's just tacky. Kennedy closed the Amazon folder with a definitive snap and reached for the second one. Marked Green New Deal. Now, he said, let's talk about the reason we're actually here. The Green New Deal. The plan you say will save the planet. He opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper with a simple bar chart. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you wrote this plan. You promoted it. So, let's talk about what it costs. He took off his glasses again, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Estimates say your plan costs $93 trillion over 10 years. That is more money than the United States has. It is more than our entire economy produces in a year. He looked at her. You say we'll pay for it by taxing the rich. If we confiscated every penny from every billionaire in America, it wouldn't be enough. So, who pays the rest? Working people pay, because that's who always pays for socialist fantasies. A man in work clothes stood up in the gallery. My name is Robert LeBlanc, he said, his Louisiana accent thick. I work on an oil rig. Good job. Good pay. Your plan eliminates my job in 10 years. Bans it. What am I supposed to do? I'm in my 40s. You want me to learn to code? Really? How do I feed my kids while I retrain for some job that might not even exist? Robert sat down heavily. Kennedy nodded. That's millions of Americans. Congresswoman, your plan eliminates them all in a decade. But you don't talk about that in your Instagram videos. You just say, green jobs, like it's magic. Kennedy continued, moving to the collateral damage of the Green New Deal. It's not just the workers. It's the communities. He gestured to a woman who stood up. I'm the mayor of a coal town in Wyoming, she said, her voice shaking. Our town is small. The mine is everything. Your plan closes it immediately. What happens to us? Do we all just move? Abandon our homes, our churches, our lives, our grandparents' graves? Next, an elderly woman stood up, clutching her purse. I'm on Social Security, she said. Fixed income. You want to ban natural gas? Make electricity more expensive? How do I heat my home in winter? Do you want me to freeze to death? Is that your solution? Sacrifice the elderly to save the planet. A younger economist stood up. I've studied your plan, he stated. You know what happens? Manufacturing moves overseas to China. We lose the jobs. And global pollution actually goes up. You haven't saved the planet. You've just outsourced the problem. Kennedy clicked to a final slide. 0.1 degrees Celsius. Even if we did it, Kennedy said, even if we spent $93 trillion and destroyed millions of jobs, global temperatures would decrease by 1/10 of 1 degree. By the year 2100, it's like burning down your house to kill a single mosquito. And the real kicker? 80% of those solar panels come from China. You're not saving the planet. You're outsourcing our economy to our biggest rival. Speaking of outsourcing, Kennedy said, his voice hardening, let's talk about your personal commitment. You demand sacrifice from Robert LeBlanc. What do you sacrifice? He pulled out a new stack of papers detailing her travel. These are your campaign's FEC reports. You preach environmental responsibility, but your records showed 200 Uber and Lyft rides for distances less than a mile. A 6-block trip, but you took an Uber. You post selfies on the subway, but the receipts say you live in the back of an SUV. He slapped a photo on the table. Private jets. You flew private to the climate conference in Copenhagen. You flew private to Davos. You even flew private to Coachella. Your personal carbon footprint for that one weekend was bigger than Robert LeBlanc's for an entire year. He pulled out a utility bill. Your DC apartment, luxury building, you have a heated rooftop pool. Your share of the energy consumption is massive. And your investments? You own funds with stakes in Exxon, Chevron, and BP. You profit from the very oil you tell us is evil. Kennedy produced one final document. This is an email from Greta Thunberg's team, declining your invitation to a joint event. They wrote, "We cannot partner with someone whose personal choices so starkly contradict their public positions. Even the most famous climate activist recognized your fraud." Kennedy returned to the lifestyle folder. Now, let's talk about the final contradiction. The one that proves your entire brand is a lie. He displayed the photos again. The $2.700 a month luxury apartment. The $40 Tesla. The $300 haircuts. The designer clothes. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you don't live like the people you claim to represent. You perform as one of them. A young woman stood up in the gallery. I was an intern in her office. She said, her voice trembling. Full-time hours. Unpaid. I ate ramen every day while working for someone who preaches a living wage. She used me. She talks about exploitation while she exploits unpaid labor in her own office. Next to her, a young man stood up. I majored in political science because of you. He said bitterly. I believed the hype. Now I have $80 in debt and no job because I followed a movement that attacks the only economy that hires people. Leaders live in luxury. Followers stay poor. That's your socialism. Kennedy nodded. That's the pattern. And speaking of pattern, let's talk about the money. He pulled out a financial flowchart. Your boyfriend, Riley Roberts, his income skyrocketed after your election. He received consulting contracts from tech companies you regulate. His income tripled the year you took office. That looks a lot like profiting from your position. That's not honesty. Ma'am, that's corruption. You're not fighting for the working class. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you're performing for the laptop class. And you're getting rich doing it. Kennedy moved to his final section of documents. Now, we come to the most cynical political stunt of your career. The one that reveals your true character. He displayed the split screen again. AOC at the Met Gala versus her grandmother's leaking roof. Let's talk about your grandmother. He detailed her June 2021 tweet, blaming Trump for her abuela's suffering. He then revealed the devastating truth of the GoFundMe, a conservative commentator. Matt Walsh, saw your tweet. Strangers raised over $100 to fix her home. Kennedy's voice dropped to a cold, cutting tone. And you rejected the money. Confusion rippled through the gallery. Your spokesperson called the GoFundMe a cynical stunt. You refused to accept a single dollar. Ma'am, why? Because accepting help from a conservative would hurt your political brand. You preferred to let your grandmother suffer, to let her roof continue to leak, than to admit a conservative did a good deed. You needed her to keep suffering so you could keep tweeting about it. He looked directly at her. What kind of person uses their own grandmother's misery as a prop, and then rejects the charity raised to help her? Kennedy gathered his folders, stacking them neatly on the dais. The hearing room was completely silent. 200 people held their breath. I'm just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana. Kennedy began, his drawl thick and slow. But even I can see what you are. He laid out the visual timeline on the table, tapping each folder. Amazon. You killed 25,000 jobs for likes. Green New Deal. You proposed a plan that costs $93 trillion and freezes the elderly. Lifestyle. You live in luxury while preaching poverty. Labor. You exploit unpaid interns while demanding a living wage. Family. You rejected help for your own grandmother to score political points against Republicans. Kennedy looked up. Your math doesn't work. Your policy doesn't work. It is performance art, not leadership. It is Instagram activism, not governance. AOC stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is just an attack because I challenge power. Your power, Kennedy interrupted, not unkindly. You're a member of Congress with a six-figure salary. Your boyfriend got wealthy off your position. You live in luxury. You're not challenging power. You're wielding it, and wielding it badly. AOC's voice shook. This is the patriarchy trying to silence a strong woman of color who dares to. Ma'am, Kennedy's voice cut through her defense like a knife. I'm reading from your official reports. Jessica, the hairstylist you stiffed? She's a woman of color. Maria Rodriguez, who lost the Amazon job. She's Latina. This isn't about race or gender. It's about whether you tell the truth. And the evidence shows you don't. Kennedy closed the folders. Mr. Chairman, I move that we end Ms. Ocasio-Cortez's testimony. She has zero credibility to judge anyone's character. Her presence here is a distraction from the actual business of evaluating Mr. Patel's qualifications. AOC sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. Her lawyer, seeing the finality of the situation, simply whispered, "Resign." Chairman Graham looked at the defeated figure. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, do you have anything to add? She shook her head, unable to speak. Then you're dismissed, Graham said. AOC stood on shaky legs and walked toward the exit. The cameras captured the image of the social media icon running away from the reality she had created. The video clips went supernova. Within 2 hours, Kennedy's systematic destruction of AOC had been viewed 200 million times. The political fallout was immediate. The Washington Post fact-checker confirmed every core fact Kennedy cited. The New York Times ran a piece on the performance politics problem. The Democratic establishment, Pelosi, Schumer, gave ice-cold statements, effectively abandoning her. Mike Generis, her primary challenger, announced a massive surge in fundraising. 6 weeks later, facing a humiliating defeat, AOC announced she would not seek re-election, claiming she wanted to focus on grassroots organizing. The era of Instagram socialism was over. The political establishment had been shocked. But the system, slow and unforgiving, was working. Kash Patel was confirmed as FBI director by the Senate. The vote demonstrating that Kennedy's methodical exposure had neutralized the political theater used against him. The contrast between the two men was complete. Kennedy, the rumpled country lawyer, quietly went back to work. He turned down millions in book deals and speaking offers. No interviews. Michael, he told his chief of staff. This wasn't about winning. It was about real people being hurt by politicians who care more about their image than their constituents. The epilogue was written by the victims. The $100 from the GoFundMe that AOC had rejected was distributed to other hurricane relief organizations in Puerto Rico, repairing 12 homes. And Jessica, the hairstylist who was stiffed, called a local paper to say her business was booming. The truth always matters, she said. The story was over. Kennedy, back on his porch in Louisiana, sat with his grandson, Johnny Jr. "Papa," the boy asked, "my teacher showed us that video again. The one where you made that lady cry. Were you scared?" Kennedy chuckled, casting his line into the bayou. "No, Johnny. You know why? Because I had the truth on my side. And truth is like this bayou right here. It might move slow. People might try to dam it up. Or muddy it. But it just keeps flowing. And eventually, it washes away everything that isn't real." He smiled. "You can't stop the truth, son. You can only delay it."